Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming and thank you for that introduction, Jane, and for all your work that you've done on this. It's really brilliant to be here and to have some of the most amazing campaigners that I've known over the years in the music industry who've done an enormous amount of heavy lifting on behalf of all of us women working in music. So it's a real pleasure to be joined by Naomi Pohl and Nadia Khan, and as Jane was saying, I think Rebecca has got a poorly child, so we're not sure whether she will make it. Um, but either way, we've got a fantastic panel. So I'm going to kick off. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and my experience of the music industry. So I'm a sound engineer and music producer. I've worked in music for about 20 years. And it has changed a lot over the years. So I would say broadly, even though we're talking about something quite serious like misogyny in music, I would say it is a generally positive trajectory, even though change hasn't come as fast as we would like. And for those of you who aren't in the music industry, I'm just going to give you a little overview of the structure of the industry because it's a little bit different from some other workplaces. So the music industry is around 70% self-employed. So 70% of people working within music don't have quite the same employment protections that employees do. There's I was looking at some stats on diversity and the picture isn't completely clear. So the most recent survey was on people that work within the industry, but not in creative roles. So for that part of the sector, it's around 50-50, slightly more women than men. But as you might expect, it skews very heavily towards more men in senior positions, more men getting paid more, and more women in the more junior positions. In terms of ethnic diversity, on that particular survey, it was around 8% identified as being from an Asian background, 8% as being from a Black background, and 8% as being mixed race. And as I say, that's only one part of the industry. There's other parts that I think are much more male dominated. Certainly the part of the industry that I've spent 20 years working in is very male dominated. When I started, it was around 5% women amongst engineers and producers. It's now gone up to around 15%, but obviously still a long way to go. And I know there's various parts of musicians, orchestras, the West End that also have their own very big gender imbalances, and maybe Naomi and Nadia can pick up in their particular areas and talk about that as well. Without further ado, I'm just going to introduce Naomi and Nadia. I'll go to you first, Naomi, because you're on my screen first. Naomi Pohl is the General Secretary of the Musicians Union, the first woman General Secretary of the Musicians Union. And yeah, if you can tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into your role, and what you've done fighting for women over the years, because I know you have been at this for quite some time. Thank you.
Thanks, Olga, and hi, everybody. So I'm Naomi Pohl, and I was elected to be General Secretary of the Musicians Union about 2.5 years ago now. And I absolutely love the job. It's a great job. It's a great organisation. I came through the union movement, so I'm not actually a musician myself. But I started working for the Writers Guild of Great Britain, which is a trade union for scriptwriters and screenwriters, probably like well over 20 years ago now. And then I found out about the Musicians Union, and I could see it was a really powerful union. And I moved across in 2009. The MU is still quite male dominated, so there's lots and lots of reasons for that, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But there are still barriers, absolutely, for women working in music. Most of our members, about 85%, are freelance. And we're about kind of 68% male members of the union. So it's still a male dominated industry. Part of that is about the gatekeepers, people who are actually choosing musicians for work. Part of it is because it's not very family friendly. There's a lot of late night working. And you know, as we will all understand, there's barriers around safety for women in the workplace and also kind of getting to and from work, not to mention discrimination. And unfortunately, we see plenty of examples of that. One of the things that I wanted to talk about at this session is that we run a safe space service. So anyone working in music can report instances of sexual harassment or bullying to us. The majority, not all, but the majority of people who report to safe space are women. And you know, we're there to be a kind of listening ear and also to help signpost and try and support people who've experienced sexual harassment and bullying in the workplace. Unfortunately, we launched this service around the time that the Me Too movement started, and it's as busy as ever, you know, which is depressing. I know we're going to talk later about how things have improved in the industry, but there's clearly still a massive issue, and there's still a lot of change needed. And I really spent a lot of time pushing for culture change, because it's not just about removing barriers to entry, it's also about how women are actually treated when they are working in music. So that's a bit of my background, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Yeah, I remember when I was on the board of the Music Producers Guild, signposting members to your safe space service. So I know it's made a real difference to lots of my colleagues as well. I'm going to come to Nadia next, please. If you could give us a little bit about your background and tell us about your organisation, Women in Control, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Olga. And yeah, just echoing what Naomi said, really great to be here, really great to see you all and looking forward to this discussion. My name is Nadia Khan. I've been working in the music industry for over 20 years. So I guess what you said, Olga, just my background is working independently. I run my own business and I'm very multifaceted. I work across a number of different areas. I'm the ex-chair of AIM, which is the trade body for the independent music sector, the Association of Independent Music. I'm currently the chair of Earth%, which is Brian Eno's charity that is the music industry's climate foundation. We launched Nature as an Artist on Spotify with UN Live this year, which was really exciting. And my background is over the 20 years, I've been primarily a music manager and music industry consultant and working in typically very male-dominated parts of the industry, particularly when I started out. It's actually my 20-year anniversary this year of managing my first ever artist. So I've been working with him for 20 years and he comes from a rap genre. And when I started working with him 20 years ago, I was the only woman manager that I knew. I didn't start in the industry that I'm sure a lot of you probably can relate to this. I didn't start in my role as a manager thinking that I'm different or I'm at a disadvantage, but I think going into that role and you know, working with an artist and working in the industry in that sector as a manager, I really very quickly found out and faced a lot of different misogyny and just challenges across my whole journey. You know, I ended up working with a very successful artist or building a very successful career for him, working and building and running successful independent labels. We were charting in top 10 records that I was running. We were touring internationally and across the UK. So from the outside, it looked like I had a very, very successful career. But the reality of my experience as a woman in the industry in that role was extremely challenging, extremely isolating, knocked away at my confidence. As I said, I started the industry very bold, very ambitious, really believing in myself, didn't see myself as anything different. I changed how I dressed. I stopped wearing high heels, stopped wearing dresses, tried to wear, you know, I've got my kind of uniform as a manager, I guess. I wear my suits, my blazers, and I feel like that's my armor that I need for the industry. I have consistently faced, you know, a lot of different bias in the industry, whether it's unconscious bias of being mistaken for a makeup artist or a stylist when I walk into a video shoot. I've been thrown off festival stages that while my artist is performing, I've been refused to go backstage. I've just been completely ignored or dismissed backstage. I've had all these experiences. And I think, you know, like I said, I was managing and having a very successful career. And another aspect, which is, I guess, leads me on to why I've been invited to speak today, is I'm the founder of Women in Control, which is a nonprofit organization I set up in the music industry. And the reason why I was facing in the music.
It's all right, you froze for a minute, Nadia.
Oh gosh, am I back?
You're back.
Okay, just let me know if it happens again. But yeah, I started Women in Control because I wanted to have a real conversation about what my experiences were really like in the industry, not just somebody looking at my Instagram and seeing that I was having all these successful moments. So I started putting on events and creating these safe spaces for women to come and speak. And just everyone had the same experience. When we got in the room, we all spoke about how we'd all had these same experiences, and it was so frustrating that we'd all just been going through this and accepting this. So I've seen how misogyny manifests in overt and covert ways in the industry, but I've also seen the strength of collective action to dismantle it. And through Women in Control, collectively, we've made a lot of positive change within the industry, and I'm sure we can get into that in a little bit as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nadia. I've heard you speak about some of this, but some of this is new, so thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the misogyny in music inquiry that was done by the House of Commons Select Committee. I know it's Labour Women's Network, so probably quite a lot of people are familiar with select committees, but in case you're not, a select committee is a group of backbench MPs. That means they're not ministers, they're not in charge of a government department, but they kind of look at topics. So this was done by the Culture Committee, who look at different important topics in culture and have quite considered investigations that are not particularly party political, but they will find a topic and investigate it and call witnesses and ask them about this topic and ask organisations and members of the public to submit evidence. So it's quite a kind of measured, non-partisan, in-depth look at a topic. And that's what this misogyny in music report was. And I think Naomi and Nadia, I think you both gave evidence at that committee, didn't you? I know I submitted a report on the behalf of the Music Producers Guild, which again was quite a harrowing experience, even just to gather all of that evidence. But I think it was very worthwhile. And I'm just going to read you the sort of opening paragraph from the summary of this report. It says, women working in the music industry face limitations in opportunity, a lack of support, gender discrimination and sexual harassment and assault, as well as the persistent issue of unequal pay in a sector dominated by self-employment and gendered power imbalances. Despite increases in representation, these issues are endemic, are intensified for women faced with intersectional barriers, particularly racial discrimination. And then the report made a number of recommendations around legal protections and stronger industry regulations. So that's the kind of backdrop, and I think that is what inspired you, Jane, to organise this panel for us. So I guess my first question for both Naomi and Nadia is, what progress have we seen since this report was published last January? Have we seen any progress? What do you think? I'll go to you first, Naomi.
Yeah, well, just to say, it was my colleague John Shortell, who's our head of equality, diversity and inclusion, who gave the oral evidence to the select committee, actually, and he was brilliant. And it's great to have the male allies, because he helps run Safe Space service for us as well, and he's a great campaigner. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, I'd kind of go back to, again, when the Me Too movement started, that I feel like the industry wasn't really talking about the issue of sexual harassment at all. And actually, at the time, we did a survey of our members, and we found some quite shocking statistics about about women's experiences working in music. And the reaction from the industry was kind of, we don't want anyone to think that the industry is a bad place to work. You know, there are organisations that we're part of that are obviously campaigning on behalf of the music industry, and we want the music industry to attract attention, I suppose, like positive attention. So it's, you know, it's difficult to tell the story that actually things behind the scenes aren't always that rosy. But I think it's really important. It's part of the picture, and it's true, isn't it? So you can't get away from it. And actually, the industry will be so much better if we do manage to tackle these problems, and it is a safe space for everybody. It should be somewhere where everyone can work free from discrimination and harassment. So I think since the Me Too movement started, I think that what's changed is that around boardroom tables, you actually hear the subject discussed more openly. And I feel like at the beginning, people wanted to shut the discussion down. And I think we've got beyond that. I think the same has happened a bit with mental health in music, that to start with, there was a denial of the issue. And then it's actually become like a common topic and something that people are much more aware of. So I think that does lead to a culture shift. And we have seen a lot more women, thanks to the work of Nadia and others. Like, we see a lot more women in leadership positions, and I think that does change. I definitely got the sense when I was running for election to be General Secretary that there were a lot of not just women, but also underrepresented groups who were getting behind me, which was really fantastic. And I think they saw it as a sign of change, actually, to have somebody other than an older white man running the union. And I hope that I'm delivering that change. So I feel like we are campaigning on issues that we might not have campaigned about in the past. And I do feel like the number of women now in leadership positions is changing things. And it's just, a topic that's more frequently on agendas. Unfortunately, the Conservative government didn't adopt the recommendations in the Misogyny in Music report, which was incredibly disappointing. But then, thank God, we have a Labour government now, and actually they are making promises. So we're really hoping that we'll get some legislative change, because we need rights for freelancers, and we need to make sure that the protections are there in law. Because so often people come to us with cases, and you've got one freelancer making a complaint about another freelancer, and the nature of working in the creative industries is that you can be on a project for a very brief period of time, and then both of you move on, and it's quite hard to then take action. It's hard to find the responsible person. You may not be aware of the policies that are in place in that particular workplace, and it's difficult to get retrospective action. And when we open the Safe Space service, there are a lot of historic complaints coming to us as well, which is difficult. But I think people felt, and women are still feeling like now is a moment when you can speak out and you will be believed, and there is a chance of some action. So I think things are changing, but unfortunately, as ever, probably not quickly enough.
Thanks, Naomi. Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the freelance nature of our work, because I want to sort of talk about that a bit more, because I think that does expose people a bit more and makes them more vulnerable. You've said about people being on short-term projects. I mean, certainly most of my projects tend to be 2 to 3 weeks maximum. But then, as you say, there might be protection for you as a freelancer if you're being discriminated against by the person that is contracting you, but there's no protection for you if you're being discriminated against or harassed by somebody who is another freelancer working alongside you. And then the other issue you have is, obviously, you haven't got stable work, so you're reliant on other people for work. So if the harassment, or even worse, I've had cases of assault from people in the industry that have happened by their clients or by clients of the studios, that again, there's this massive power imbalance and people don't feel that they can take any action, or sometimes their managers or the studio owners don't feel they can take any action. So that's a real vulnerability amongst freelance workers. So I really hope that we do see some legislative change. Nadia, do you want to come in on this one as well?
Definitely. So I gave oral evidence at the Women and Inequalities Committee, but I also submitted written evidence on behalf of Women in Control and our 3,000 members. And echoing what Olga said, it was a really harrowing experience. So I found it bittersweet in a way. I found it quite tiring and draining going through that whole process, particularly given the outcome. It felt like, was that a lot of work and effort in vain, and did we get anywhere with it? But at the same time, I think that the work that we do, and I've been doing, we started Women in Control in 2017, and there is a denial of the issue. So I was battling, trying to actually get people to understand that we had a real problem in the music industry around misogyny. And how I worked around that was I lent into data. So Women in Control we started publishing a lot of data reports, actually highlighting what's the gender pay gap data, putting it in easy digestible format and information. Another report that I published and researched and put together in 2020 was the Seat at the Table report that looked at the representation of women in leadership roles in the boardroom and in chair and CEO positions. At the time, I was on the board of AIM. And when I published the report, or when I did the research, I found out that there was only one woman chair sitting across all of the trade bodies, which actually spurred me on to go and put myself forward for the chair role. It wasn't something that I'd considered doing that before. So I think that I have experienced over the years continuing to try and get people interested in this topic and issue. And people always say to me, are you still going on about the same thing? Are you still doing this? And I'm like, yep, because nothing's changed. So I do feel like the committee and this whole inquiry brought a lot of tension back to the topic and brought it to the forefront of all of the organizations and all of the industries, and actually forced them to come and say something when maybe when we're trying to approach them as a campaigner, particularly, the doors are closed. So I think that it was quite cathartic in a way to be sat on the panel and felt that you were listened to. I think that a lot of the work and the good work that's being done in the industry is being led by campaigners who are doing it in their free time, with no, pay or no support. I'm in a particularly unique position in a ironic way, because I am a freelancer and I'm independent, that I'm able to speak more freely than others. And another thing that happened with Women in Control, with that being a harrowing experience, is people started approaching me, so many women across the industry started approaching me with their horrible stories, that it actually was completely overwhelming for me. I was directing people back to, the safe spaces that Naomi set up with Musicians Union. And I just felt overwhelmed that I couldn't actually do anything to make the change, because these problems are so vast and so wide. And it just felt like that first step was acknowledging that the industry has a problem, because there was that denial. Then there was, okay, let's have a safe space, let's try and talk about it. And I feel like we're still trying to figure out the action and change. So just to, I guess, close up on that, I would say that the Seat at the Table report, from its first publication in 2020, since then, we've done active campaigning with organizations, or creating awareness about these board roles, because a lot of it comes down to lack of awareness for women to know that they're eligible for these roles, and maybe having a bit of support in terms of campaigning and how to speak for yourself and how to promote yourself on social media. We have a good following on our platforms and social media, across social platforms. So we would make campaigns or flyers and, try and do it in an engaging way, where you're trying to get people to get involved in a topic that maybe is not so interesting. Like, back me for a board position, it's not really, the hottest topic in the music industry. So how do we do that in an interesting way? But like I said, I think just seeing that power of collective action, we published the 3rd edition of the Seat at the Table report in January 2024. And for the first time in the history of the music industry, we could say that we reached over 50% of representation across all of the music trade body boards under the UK Music umbrella. But that's a great point now that we achieved. But, as you all know, I'm sure with governance, with board seats, things are slow and things can slip back. So it's now about how do we keep that movement going without burning out. I think that's, what I would say.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I know I've got a hand up from the audience. Pauline, is it okay if we take questions at the end? And I'll stick with our panelists for now, but then we will make some time for questions at the end, or put them in the chat as well, and we'll pick them up at the end. Naomi, you wanted to come in?
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I just wanted to mention the Creative Industries Independent Standards Authority, which was has come about as a result of various campaigners' work, but I'd say particularly Rebecca Ferguson, just, lifting a lid really on the fact that we have a problem in the creative industries. And, there were quite a few survivors who actually spoke out, and there was a sort of bullying and harassment roundtable going on, which led to this potential regulator being set up. So it's a body that's being established at the moment. It is going to be an independent body where anyone working in film, TV, theatre, fashion, music can go to report instances of sexual harassment, bullying, discrimination. And I think that there will still be, if you're employed or if you're working in an organisation and there's a policy or procedure in place or an HR department, that would still be the first port of call. But I think CISA will be able to step in, hopefully, and take action where there are cases that are very difficult to resolve or that are involving freelancers where there's not an obvious kind of responsible organisation. So I think, it's still in the early stages of being established, and it needs to be funded by the industry, which is a challenge in itself. Going around to the organisations that potentially in the past might have covered up some issues and asking them for money to fund an organisation that might be independently investigating them. That's pretty tough. But it's got the support of the select committee, and it's got the support of the government. So the pressure's on really for the industry to actually sign up and make this happen. And I think it's going to be a really positive thing, but the proof will be in the pudding once it's established. But it's a really positive sign, particularly for freelancers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the thing that feels good about it is, Nadia mentioned that all of the people that have been campaigning on these issues, vast majority have been doing it in their spare time. And again, I think Labour women will empathise with this. It's like having, for underrepresented groups, to have to put in the extra work to be on all the panels, on all the committees, put themselves forward because nobody else is doing it. It can be quite exhausting and overwhelming sometimes. So I think it does seem right that the industry is putting its hand in its pocket to actually pay for professionals to deal with these issues. But as you say, the proof is in the pudding, because I think it's been in the early stages of being set up for about 5 years now. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing that happen, because I do think that will make a difference. And another issue that I sort of wanted to touch on a little bit and get your views on is the use of non-disclosure agreements. That was something that came up quite a lot when I was gathering evidence from victim survivors of harassment in the studio space particularly. There were quite a few who had been basically forced to sign non-disclosure agreements in return for either receiving a payoff to leave the job or just to kind of brush it under the carpet. And it seems to me that that CISA could be a really helpful body in stopping these non-disclosure agreements being used to cover up terrible behaviour. Obviously, there's the more benign form of non-disclosure agreement that I'm sure we've all signed in a work context. If you're working on a new album or a new film, you might be asked to sign this. But this is a different kind of thing. It's a confidentiality clause or a non-disclosure agreement to basically say you won't ever speak about the things that you have alleged have happened to you. So yeah, I want to hear people's views on what we think CISA could do for that and what more we need to do to kind of stop these agreements being used to silence people and to cover up wrongdoing. Don't know if you've got a view on that, Nadia.
Yeah, I think I've had a lot of women approach me in the industry and privately talk to me about the fact that they have these NDA agreements and in place, and that they're frightened about speaking out. And I think it is more widespread than we would think, and has been a more common practice in the industry. I also think that CISA have a really important part that they could potentially play here. Because, as I said, with all these women coming forward and coming to me, I think that we needed an independent body where we can direct everyone to, that can collect the information, that can deal with it in with a structured format and way, and try and shine more light on this practice. I think a lot of it is around awareness as well, because a lot of people don't know their rights, or, like I said, through my experience, didn't even speak out about their experiences and just went along with it. So I think a big thing is creating that awareness and creating that safe space to let women know that they can come forward and that there's something that they can do about it, and that they can tackle it and get somebody to look at the agreement and see whether it's been that you've been, you know, like legally to look into it and see where you legally stand on it as well. So I think that it's really important that we can provide that type of advice. So I'm hugely supportive of CISA, but yeah, also just echoing what you've said, both about just seeing how it rolls out. But again, I think that's been one great outcome that we can say from the Women in Misogyny inquiry, is just seeing that pan out. Because I remember going to round tables, you know, many years ago about CISA forming, and then seeing them come to boardrooms and actually seeing industry put their hand in their pocket and start to say that they're going to fund them, I think is so needed and really important.
Thank you. And Naomi, I wanted to get your take on that, and also maybe you can talk about some of the support that the Musicians Union can offer to people in that situation if they've been asked to sign an NDA and they're not quite sure whether they should, whether you offer support for that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've you know, we've got a legal advice service for our members, so we've got lawyers who would look over those kinds of agreements. But I've also spoken to other women working in music where they've been in that position of not knowing whether to sign something or not, and we've been able to give some advice. So I do know of women who've been able to negotiate the confidentiality clauses out, but I think that's probably quite rare, to be honest. And I think the other thing is that, what do we do about all of those agreements that have been signed in the past? You know, there needs to be some sort of retrospective, I don't know, the government basically needs to say that you shouldn't be able to use these agreements in cases of sexual harassment. I mean, you shouldn't be able to use an NDA to cover up criminal behaviour, which is, in some cases, that's what we're talking about. And people do feel silenced, and that does mean that people get away with it, which is awful. And also, you know, most women that approach me through Safe Space, their number one motivation is to stop this from happening to anybody else. I would say that that's common with everybody who's approached us. And of course, if you're in a position where you can't speak out, then it makes it very difficult for you to prevent it happening to other people. Not that I should say that's not the responsibility of the person who's experienced the behaviours. And the other really sad thing is that still, when women get in touch with us, they still blame themselves. And so I feel like part of our role is actually, you know, we had some training from Rape Crisis when we first set up the service. And the number one role that I think we play is actually to just be that confidential space where people in music can come to us and tell us that something's happened. And we know we might be the first person that they've told. And we always believe survivors who come forward to us, and we're there to support them. And often it is actually talking somebody through the fact that this behavior was not your fault. This is somebody else's behavior. It was their responsibility. They did this, you didn't. You know, it doesn't matter if you walked home wearing a short skirt or if you'd had a few drinks. In no way does anyone ever deserve this kind of behavior. And it's very distressing when we talk to women and they feel like they're in some way at fault or to blame, and it's just not the case. But what we hope to do is signpost and give them options, like, here are the choices that you have. This is how you could take it forward if you wanted to, but it has to be survivor led. So it's always down to the woman whether she wants to take action or not. And if something is potentially criminal, we would say, you know, you have the option of going to the police about this. Again, that's the individual person's choice. We would never, you know, try and force someone to go to the police. That's not our job. Our job is to advise somebody on what their options are so that they have the full picture and they can make a decision for themselves. But I feel like a lot of women are just really grateful to be able to talk to somebody about it and know that it's kept confidential, and also someone who understands music and understands the sector. And, you know, there are times when we've been able to take action confidentially. You know, there've been cases where I've even phoned somebody who's been accused of something, and I've talked them through where their behavior went wrong over the phone. And I feel like, you know, that was because that was what the woman who reported to us wanted me to do. She said, I want him to know that his behavior has been harmful. And I hope that because he had it raised with him, you know, we kind of said, we're not taking this any further, but she wants you to know that this was inappropriate. And I hope that you will behave differently in the future. And actually we had somebody wrote to us recently and said, like, you have opened my eyes, and I do realize that that was a mistake, and I am going to be like learning from it. So I think, you know, that's not always how people react. But occasionally you can see that somebody is actually taking the feedback on board. So there's a whole range of ways that we can help and support and signpost. And there's so many great organizations out there providing training and providing support. So there's always somewhere that we can signpost people onto as well.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, that's really good to know that actually there are a range of options, and it's not just go to the police or don't go to the police, depending obviously on the seriousness of the allegations. Yeah, because I think often, I mean, I would have to say I would still be hesitant. I wouldn't know what to advise people if they said, do I tell my manager? Because unfortunately, we've seen quite often where victim survivors have reported terrible behavior by a client or a colleague and reported it to their manager, and they've been shut down. Or maybe the managers wanted to do the right thing, but then an owner or a more senior person has then shut it down. So it's really helpful to know that actually there are organizations out there that will have your back. So join a union, obviously, is really helpful advice, I think, for anyone starting in the industry as well. Just to have that organization that is not connected to your employer, that hasn't got those commercial interests and personal relationships that might sway how an employer is thinking about treating you, I think is really valuable. And then the educational aspect of women knowing what their rights are and what options are open to them, but also of men recognizing their behavior. I know often that we've all sat on panels like this or in working groups talking about these issues with a bunch of women, but I'm kind of interested in what it would be like to run educational programs for men about what is appropriate behavior and how they can be good allies. That feels like quite a good thing to look into. We've got a little bit of time left. We'll go to questions shortly. I think the other sort of issue I wanted to briefly touch on is the motherhood penalty, which I think forms a big part of discrimination against women. Obviously, maternity and pregnancy discrimination is an issue in the workplace. And then also, once people have children, once they are parents, they're looked at sometimes differently by potential employers. And then you also just have the practical aspects of maternity leave. If you're self-employed, you've obviously only got maternity allowance and some quite strict rules around that. And then the cost of childcare, particularly in an insecure work environment where you might not know when your next project is, or it's for 3 weeks and then you've got a month off and then you've got another 2 weeks here and there. And just, I guess, what advice you have for people, how to navigate that, and what you think needs to change structurally or within the industry to kind of make it easier for mothers to actually carry on with their careers. Who wants to take this one? I'll go for Naomi first.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a working mum, so but I'm not a freelancer, and I do appreciate how much harder it is. I mean, lots of our members struggle with juggling once they've had children if they are freelancers, and you kind of, you know, there are some interesting examples in the West End where you get a couple and they're both working in the West End on musicals, and they've got children together, and you know, you hope that there's a good shared system there. And in the West End, you can actually dep out. So there kind of options to juggle it a little bit between the two of you. And actually in the West End, I think there's quite a lot of men who look after their kids during the day and then go out and work on a musical at night. So I like to see the men being fully involved in the parenting responsibilities. But yeah, it's really tough one if you're a freelancer, because I think a lot of women just feel like they have to keep on working because the support's not there financially. I think the government needs to do something about it. You know, we need to have proper paid self-employed parental leave, and it should be for all genders should be treated equally and have access to that. So shared parental leave, there's still not much take up. which is a shame. And I think partly because people don't understand it and don't realize that they qualify for it. But again, even harder if you're a freelancer. So we're looking forward to Labour's piece of work around the self-employed and rights, which is going to follow on from the recent employment bill that was published. So that's going to be a piece of work that we're really hoping to be closely involved in. And a big thread for us is going to be equality, diversity and inclusion, and making sure that parents are considered, and unpaid carers as well, to try and get better rights in place and better financial package, frankly, to be able to enable people to take the time off. It's so hard, isn't it? But Olga, I know you've had this experience. That it's so hard having to take time off, and then, you know, all the people that were booking you before, you've not been in touch with them for a few months. There's always a risk that some of the relationships have moved on and they're using other people. So you have to then try and get back, get the foothold back in. So it's a real challenge.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's kind of, it's what got me, I guess, active in politics and campaigning, was when I had my son as a self-employed sound engineer. I couldn't share the leave with my husband. I didn't want to be, I mean, I couldn't be working full time because I hadn't slept and had leaky boobs and was just a bit of a mess. But I wanted to be back part-time. I wanted to go back and do some sessions to, I guess, regain my sense of self and complete a task and have a day where I actually created something rather than just cleaning up stuff. And I had kind of 9 months where I was worried about my career. I knew my clients were working with other people. And when I actually spoke to some people in the Department of Business about this, we had a big campaign on shared parental leave. It came as news to the civil servant that if you shut down your business for 9 months, that it might be a struggle to get that back. This was kind of new information. So I think we do need a real rethink to accommodate freelance parents, to enable both parents, dads, mums, and same-sex parents to properly care for their children and also sustain careers. And it needs to be flexible and workable. I think shared parental leave currently doesn't particularly work for employed people, but I think a version of it could be quite helpful for self-employed people, like you're saying, Naomi, that couples that are both doing shows in the West End. I mean, most musicians that I know are in relationships with other musicians, because basically you don't get out much if you're in studios or on tour. That's kind of the only people that you meet. So it's kind of, it would make sense to enable those families to parent properly. I don't know, Nadia, what your experience has been like in the sort of in the management sector and in the parts of the industry that you've worked in. How has that treated parents from your perspective?
Yeah, I wanted to share a little bit of data because you spoke earlier about just the representation of women and men in entering the industry, and there's data out there that shows that it's around 50% at entry-level roles in the industry. But we also have data that shows that over the age of 35, the women in the industry rapidly starts to decline. And that was a research point that was really interesting to me. And I wanted to look into that to understand what were the challenges that women face. So when you think about this 50-50, and then you go and look at all of the representation of women across the music industry in different sectors, then you get a totally different number. Olga, you spoke about sound engineers being 15%, PRS for music, the rights organization for composers have around 160,000 members, and their women writers are just under 20%. We see that 20% range, 15 to 20% range of representation across the industry. So what our research and conversations that we have with our members shows is that women are having, you know, there's a pay gap which affects them in general in terms of lack of promotion. They face a significant drop in earnings compared to the child-free counterparts. There's research that shows that women who are mothers are paid less, they're less likely to receive promotion and are perceived as less committed to their jobs as well. And I think in an industry like the music industry, you spoke about these irregular hours, travel, availability at short notice. It's very much, you're really lucky to be here. You get to go to all these events and hang out with, you know, get to go backstage, and mothers a lot of times are excluded because they're kind of seen to not meet these demands. So Women in Control, we also published a report looking at women in radio, and we spoke to over 100 women who work in radio as their main career. So that's at BBC, at Global, and it was a really eye-opening report. Over 59% of women said that they felt that having a kid would have a negative impact on their career progression. And we really wanted to take this research and also these case studies from all of these women that had spoken out to go to all of the heads of radio, but none of the women felt comfortable enough to not speak out with their name attached. So everyone just gave us all of this information anonymously, which was really just one of those things. It was just very frustrating to have sit on all this data and be able to try and create awareness of it and just not be able to get those conversations to go any further, because I do think that there are simple actions that organizations and workplaces can take to accommodate for caring responsibilities, and freelancers, as we said, lack support generally within the industry, but having more flexible working arrangements, I think, is something that's becoming more accessible, or more people having more awareness around it. But yeah, I think it's very challenging in the music industry.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I've just got a small child trying to come in here as well, illustrating my point exactly. It's about 10 to 9, so I think it's probably a good time to take some questions from people. If you want to raise your hands, and also if there's anyone that wants to ask anything that they're not comfortable asking in person, then please just feel free to message the LWN moderators as well, and they can put it in the chat for me too. So I've got Pauline George, who is my lovely colleague from Lambeth Council. Hi, Pauline.
Hello, thank you for organizing this. I'm really grateful to you and to Nadia and Naomi and everyone that is present. As a woman and a Black woman, she's double recessive, I call it. It's very difficult to go up, to be on top. I know what I went through when I was a manager at the Croydon University Hospital. Out of 7 of us, I was the only Black. I knew what I went through. And that was the reason why I went to qualify as a lawyer in 2008. And since then, I've been representing my colleagues as an employment lawyer. My question is, now, thank God, is Labour Party on. Can you share a light on it? Because as you can see, we don't have not only been a woman or Black woman in the leadership, proper leadership, even in the council as well, where I am, Lambeth Council. When you talk, because you are Black and a woman, you are shut down. You feel guilty that, oh, I'm not supposed to ask questions. When you ask, people shut you down because you are a woman. But when men ask questions, they are allowed. How can we resolve that? And then being an African as well, I don't have the English accent. That's another recessive. And people say, oh, she's aggressive, she's loud, she's this. They don't have any sense of empathy. How do we solve that? Because sometimes I lay in bed, I don't sleep and think, is it a sin to be a woman? And is it a sin to be Black? And is it a sin to be African? Free recessive. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. So that's a question on how do we tackle racism in, I guess, for women in leadership positions in the music industry. And I know that that's some data that you've looked at as well, Nadia. I'm going to take these questions in threes, so we'll come back to that. Who's next who would like to ask a question? I see Julie. Julie, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you so much for organising this. I think it's been a really important discussion. So I was a Labour MEP who'd worked in the creative industries and have come back to work in the creative industries. And I was on the Culture and Education Committee in the European Parliament and the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee. So I was dealing with these kind of cross-sectoral issues at a European level. And I mean, it's horrifying to hear the testimonies, but, you know, thank you for everything that you're all doing. My question is about the in-between spaces. So for example, is anybody working with organizations like Youth Music and the organizations that are encouraging young people to consider a career in the music industry? You know, we've seen incredible kind of Youth Music is a foundation that has seen incredible success, like with the Ezra Collective, for example. But everything that you're talking about needs to be, we need to address it before it gets to the stages that you've been talking about this evening. And I just feel that we have to do something within the youth sector and within the training sector as a kind of fundamental. So that would be my question.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, it's a really good point. And I mean, I think it's also something that sort of more broadly politicians are becoming very aware of. The sort of misogyny that is spread online with the Andrew Tate type characters, but definitely specifically in music. How do we work with those organizations? And I'll see who wants to take that. I'll take one more question and then I'll go to our panel for some answers. Margaret, do you want to come in?
Olga, can I just interrupt? I've had my hand up for a while, but I think because it comes up in brown, you can't see it.
No, I had my hand up before you. Okay. Sorry. My question is, thank you for this meeting. I just come across it this today, and then I thought it was of interest. In my previous roles, I've been an equalities officer and dealt with data and analysis, etc. And I've found that this issue of women and the pay gap and getting into senior roles has been across all industries. And I was just wondering whether people have found the link is because senior roles are for full-time jobs, and any flexibility of part-time or job sharing for those jobs. So then women aren't able to apply for those jobs because they have children to look after. So then they get not able to apply for them. Would you feel that this is something that could be looked into to get industries to make these jobs more flexible, that it doesn't need to be a sole person in one role?
Thank you. That's a really good point. So it's a question on basically, can the industry be more flexible in the jobs that it advertises? Can jobs be part-time rather than all of them being full-time 9 to 5? Really good point. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, I think. Pauline's question on tackling racism. Nadia, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of data, but having that intersectional data. And that's something that we did with Women in Control, was to not only just look at women, but also open that up with ethnicity. And in the first report, we looked at the representation of Black women, because we were released in 2020. And it was after the whole Black Lives Matter movement had started, and a lot of organizations in the music industry were talking about their commitment to diversity and started to publish figures of, you know, what their organizations makeup look like. So part of publishing this report was to shine hold a mirror up to the organization to say, you know what, where is the representation? Where is the intersectional representation? We don't see it. And when the first report was published, there were only 3% of Black women holding board seats across the music industry. And I think your colleague's name was Pauline. I think, you know, it's very challenging when you're one of the only women or few women that are in the room and dealing with this. But I'm a huge advocate for the power of representation. And being in those spaces and being able to feel that you can share your lived experiences, bring your lived experiences to the table, for example, coming around the table and actually bringing your perspective and being able to influence policies that make a change for others in the industry, which is really important. So I think that there is more awareness needs to happen in the industry, and more conversations need to happen in the industry, and we need to be more open about the challenges that are faced, because for women of color or those with disabilities or those from LGBTQ backgrounds, their challenges are compounded by systemic biases. So I think it's part of an industry-wide commitment to have that awareness, not just a checkbook kind of exercise, but to look at and consider diversity in all of its practices, hiring practices, funding allocations, and generally even with a lot of member engagement as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Nadia. Julie's question on working with sort of younger groups, youth music was one of the ones that she mentioned. Do you want to take that one, Naomi?
Yes, yeah, and I just to follow up briefly as well on that intersectional point, that we're doing a lot. I know a lot of organisations are now to try and recruit differently, and we're working with orchestras. We've rolled out a programme with the Black Lives in Music organisation, which is all about open recruitment practices and fair recruitment practices in orchestras, because there's a lack of diversity there, and we're trying to do, you know, we've got various initiatives to try and open up more spaces for underrepresented groups on our executive, for example, because we know we've got a lack of diverse representation at the moment. But yeah, I think that the point about the talent pipeline and like young people coming through is really key. And I think we've got a lot more work to do with at student level to talk about what people should expect from the industry, because I think historically, women have experienced barriers in music education and at higher education level, studying music, and they've experienced certain behaviours which then become ingrained, and then when they go into the industry they almost expect it and see it as the norm. So we've got to change the culture much earlier on, and we've got to try and change expectations so that people go into the industry with kind of a positive expectations, not already feeling like they've learned to accept these negative behaviours. So I think that is an important piece of work for the industry. But like you say, there's a lot of really great music organisations working with young people who are probably already doing some of this.
I wanted to add something here, if I could, Olga, as well. Just, you know, to speak about some of the work that I'm really passionate about doing with Women in Control, and those stages that we spoke about: denial, creating awareness, then those safe spaces, and then now I think it's about taking action. And one of the activations and initiatives that we've started with Women in Control is an apprenticeship scheme and program that supports women entering at entry level in the music industry, but it kind of feeds into, I guess, a question about what should the industry do, or what can the industry do better. And this was funded by Amazon Music. So this is an initiative that I developed with Amazon Music in partnership with AIM to give entry-level roles to women that are entering the music industry. And we're also trying to generate a lot of support or job roles within A&R in the music industry. So it's funded, the training is funded by the 2.5 million Amazon Creative Apprenticeship Levy through the government. And we launched it last year as a pilot with 6 apprentices. We're just about to announce that we're going to launch it next year and continue it on. And that's something that's really important for us. You know, we've seen that 4 out of the 6 apprentices have gone on to be kept on within their roles or found other roles within the music industry. And I think that there are things that organizations can do if they want to actually make a difference and make a change. And this came about because of a conversation that I had with Amazon Music, where they went on an away day and they read some of the data that Women in Control had published, and about, you know, the lack of women artists being supported, and they wanted to support more women artists. And then, you know, by leading that conversation, they actually sat down and put their hand in their pocket and did something actionable about it. And that's what I would like to see more organizations and industry do, because these things can really make an impact on breaking down those barriers for access into the industry, particularly from those from disadvantaged backgrounds and from diverse backgrounds as well. And that's something that, yeah, we're really passionate about.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Nadia. Then the final question was from Margaret around part-time jobs and more flexible working. How much of that is being embraced? I mean, I know sort of from my own experience, I think in the more administrative roles, so not playing or engineering or producing, I think it is definitely possible. And certainly people are also able to do those roles out of London. And actually some of the labels have actually started putting offices again out of London, which hasn't happened in a long time. So I think that's a really positive and welcome change. But I think in production, certainly in studios, I think you can't be an assistant engineer in a studio and do it part-time. It just, I've yet to see a studio where that could be made to work. Which is a shame. I mean, I remember when I was an assistant engineer, I remember thinking I can't have kids until I'm an engineer, because in the junior roles, the hours that you're expected to work, it just doesn't work. And I think we need to be a bit more creative and figure out ways to make it work, because otherwise you're just excluding a whole bunch of people. I don't know if Naomi or Nadia have got some more insights to add to that.
Well, a positive story is that the new chief execs of UK Theatre and Salt, which are it's a trade body representing theatre in the West End, they're a job share, and they came as a pair, and they've done multiple job shares as a pair, and they've both got kids, so it works really well for them. They do like half the week each, and it means they can do a couple of long days, potentially do evenings like we all do, but then they know that they've got that time later in the week when they can be there on the school pickup. I have to say I'm employed, so in that sense I'm privileged, but I've got quite a full-on full-time job with long hours, and I just really try hard to still do some morning school runs and pick the kids up. And I've said to all my colleagues, you will see in my diary sometimes that I'm doing the school pickup, and I give you permission to do likewise. Like, I more than do my hours, but I do sometimes want to duck out and go and watch the kids if they're in a carol concert or whatever. Like, that's really important to me. And my life can't just be about work. I'm a whole person, and I need to have a family life as well. And I think it's really important. I think it is really tough if you're freelance. But, I guess there's more flexibility there. The positive side of freelancing is the flexibility. The negative side is more the kind of financial side and the lack of rights. But hopefully Labour are going to resolve those problems.
Yeah, with a bit of luck. I know we're getting close to the end, but I think I've got one more hand up. Nina, I think, wanted to come in, if that's okay. Do you want to go for it, Nina?
Yeah, I suppose my question's very much around directing. I'm really keen as a director to work with more women, partly from a purely selfish point of view, that I feel as though I can be more creative when I work with women. I feel more confident as a director when I'm working with women, because I can be in my space and my way of working, and not having to do that leap we so often do when we're in a men's space. But I'm wondering, in the side of allyship, of how, when I'm talking in groups with directors and producers, where, because this conversation we're having here is one that we so often have as directors and producers, is like, and I've been quite surprised by my lack of awareness of what people in the music industry are up against. My awareness, I'm very good at creating that sort of workspace for writers, assistant directors, actresses, all of the creatives on the side of the work I'm doing. And as Olga knows, I'm learning now about the post-production side, and including sort of music in the side of the work I'm doing. So what type of things are on your wish list? Is there a way of putting together a wish list which I can then start bringing into the conversations I'm having with other women, directors and producers, to go, hey, we need to up our awareness on this. I mean, the only thing I kind of have done is talked about margins. So when I'm talking with, you know, like recently when I was talking with a composer, and I know she's a mum and there's factors there, and I kind of went, can you tell me what your margin is? What I want to do is right at the beginning, find out what your margin is. If your kid gets ill, or if there's a family, whatever, what extra cushioned margin do you need, so we can put that in ahead of time. And then if you don't need that margin, brilliant, we're ahead of the game. But if you do need the margin, we're never running behind, and you're never also kind of having to worry about, if I take this time, am I now going to make everything a matter of catch up? Hearing people talk about job shares, hearing people talk about doing part-time, hearing people talk about in the apprenticeship jobs, in the sort of learning jobs, make those accessible for people who do have children. Is there a way that you guys can almost put a list together that I can then start getting producers and directors in our small way to start backing up what you're doing? I know I'm asking you to do the toil to help us help you.
It's a good question. It's a really good question, Nina. I
Just
mean,
one other really quick thing just to add is, you guys are talking about you know, that you're continuously having to do the work to educate people. I'm really happy to hive mind with you guys about possibly putting together some really simple short films that you can start using to get the conversation going and start the process going in a way that's simple. It doesn't have to be expensive, but I'm really keen to support what you guys are doing. So if I can add to that with that side of the skills, please get in touch.
Thank you, Nina. That's a really generous offer. Is it okay if I take this one, I guess, because I've worked in film and TV music quite a lot. So I think probably you're kind of, it seems like you're on the right track with talking about scheduling. I think the things that can be difficult can be when you have to work later than you expected, but you're a single parent and you've got a babysitter at home. But then suddenly the director says, oh, can we do 2 hours of overtime with a percussionist? And it's an extra 4 hours on your day that you hadn't budgeted for in terms of babysitting. And I think it's also giving people who've got caring responsibilities permission to go, yes, tell me about what's happening with your childcare. It's fine, kids get ill, things happen. But actually just being really open as a client, as a director, acknowledging that rather than everybody pretending that they haven't got families or kids or anything. I found that really valuable for men and women directors, just being really kind of understanding about that side of things and being really upfront about that from the beginning. I guess that would probably be my main thing. And like you say, the sort of scheduling things that you've talked about, I know it's not always in the director's gift. Sometimes things come from above and you have to do things last minute and there have to be changes. But even then, if you've been upfront and open and going, it's okay, I know you've got kids, I've got kids, things happen, I understand. I think that opens that conversation. And if then maybe actually the composer needs like a bit of extra budget to get an assistant to sort something out, or that kind of thing, just having some flexibility and acknowledging that people are human. But I'm happy to take it away on, this is just my sort of, you know, off the top of my head thoughts on what you said, but I'm very happy to take it away and continue the conversation. I know we're getting pretty close to the end. I don't know if there's any like last minute burning questions that anyone sent in, or that Jane, have you got anything to add from people?
There's nothing in the chat, but if I take a liberty and ask a question while I'm here. So just as a lay music lover, what can we do to assist the cause?
Great question. I think there's probably quite a lot of things around the employment bill and around this misogyny in music inquiry. Write to your MPs, go, have you read this inquiry? You're in charge. If you've got a Labour MP, write to them, say, you're in charge now. Can you do better than the last lot? I mean, I guess in all seriousness, I think just coming, listening, I think is important. The fact that you're all here, and obviously some of you, I think, are people in music who I know, but there's also a lot of people who aren't necessarily in music and are in different parts of politics, and I'm really grateful that you've all come in to listen to this. Because I think also there's quite a lot of similarities. A lot of the issues we've talked about are workplace issues. They're not unique to music. We've got a few unique vulnerabilities perhaps, but a lot of these issues happen across the board. So again, if you're in your workplace, join your union, interact with them, tell them what's happening in your workplace, because the whole trade union movement is campaigning on a lot of these similar issues. So you don't have to be in music to kind of, I guess, stand in solidarity with workers that are having these issues. It's the same across the board. Ours might be slightly different, but it's pretty much the same. People get discriminated against. There's racism in the workplace, there's ableism, there's homophobia. And I think just offering support to people that suffer from these injustices, and organise and raise awareness when something's going on. And if you've got a colleague who's struggling, I would say, look up your rights, try and be aware of it. You don't have to suffer alone, even if you're maybe not wanting to take nuclear action. There are spaces like Naomi's Safe Space Initiative where you can actually have a conversation about what's happened to you, and hopefully make a difference for other people. I don't know if Nadia, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just echoing on what you just said. I think, a lot of the issues come from this lack of awareness. So I think even just looking at things from a different perspective, or listening to radio from a different way, and hearing, how many women artists are you hearing played there, or looking at a lineup and then seeing how many women you see on the lineup. Because, even with a lot of the reporting that we've done, even though we might not have had access to the kind of senior leaders to sit down and say, hey, what are you going to do about this directly, the indirect effect of creating that awareness and spreading that awareness has led to programmers and playlist heads going, hold on a second, I didn't realize that I was doing that. I'm going to make a conscious effort now to program more women and be more conscious of it. So I think just around that awareness, and just talking about it and just creating these spaces where we can have these conversations, spread a bit of awareness, is the most important thing, I think.
Brilliant. Naomi, do you want to finish up with any thoughts on what can people do to support musicians and everyone working in the music industry?
Yeah, I was going to say listen to women as well. Listen to women in terms of women artists, but also I think when you're in spaces where music happens as well, like just watch out for the signs. If there's an opportunity to support somebody who might be experiencing something inappropriate, or to ask a venue about their policy, do they have a zero tolerance policy on sexual harassment, that sort of thing. Because I think when you raise these things directly at a festival or with a venue, or in a studio, it makes people think, and if they don't have something in place, then maybe it'll prompt them to get something in place. But I think writing to your MPs is a really important one, especially because we've got so many new MPs who need to be briefed on all of these ongoing issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can find the Women and Equality's Misogyny Music Report online on the Parliament website. I mean, even if you want to just email them and go, you had a read of this, because I think it's really important, and I think we'll all be campaigning on some of the issues that it's raised. And just, I guess, finishing on a positive story, I think the awareness that you talked about, Naomi and Nadia, I mean, we're seeing it in film music, for example. is the fact that they're now hiring more women composers because, I mean, partly because they're a bit useless in the whole of the production, and then they look at their credits and go, oh God, we haven't got any women, but the composers get hired quite late on in the process. So I was speaking to some agents last week and they're saying, no, at the moment, they're actually hiring more women because they realize how bad the whole of the film industry is. And at the end of the process, the composer is one of the last people to get hired. So it's actually quite positive for women composers. I mean, it's still some terrible stats that there's still far fewer women composers than men. But again, the awareness is actually giving work to talented women and giving them opportunities, which is fantastic. And, you know, even if it's tick boxy, we'll take a win, I think. So has anyone got any final burning questions? I think we're kind of getting close to time, aren't we, Jane? Pauline, is that a new hand or is that?
Yes, yes. I have my hand up.
Go for it.
Would I say a comment or a burning question? Because I'm here because of my niece, who is in the music industry, and she's a Black woman, like I say, and she always come home like a bit sad because of the way she's being treated. Okay, and one day she told me about trans, that they not recognize the fact that trans can have babies as well, like when they adopt babies, they're not being respected, nobody cares about them. It's like, what do we do to raise the awareness that even if you are single sex, you can have babies, you can adopt? How would you raise that in your music industry? I came this night with that burning in my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. I think we sort of mentioned that a little bit, didn't we, around the parental leave for self-employed people, as it's a self-employed industry, and also adoption leave as well. I think that's the thing that we've also campaigned on, to give self-employed people paid adoption leave, which they currently don't get. So I think for any of those kind of parenting things, I would suggest the government have got a review on parental leave. So any of those particular issues around whether it's trans people or same-sex couples having children, then absolutely that would be the place to kind of feed stuff back on policy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. I mean, I think that's kind of, we're at time, aren't we, Jane? So I just want to say a huge thank you to our fantastic guests, Nadia and Naomi. You've been absolutely brilliant. So lovely to see you both. And thank you, Jane, and all of the LWN team for organising and moderating and making it all happen, and for sending everyone emails encouraging them to join. It's really wonderful to have such a big turnout tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nadia, Olga, and Naomi. It's been a pleasure.